Hello and welcome to the third session of the HR Summit of OpenUp. Today we will be diving into the topic Leadership's Evolution in the Age of Hybrid Working and Changing Employee Values. So at OpenUp, we envision a world where mental well-being is recognized as a top priority and is supported in the workplace. We believe in empowering people and organizations to make mental well-being a top priority through shared experiences and lessons so that they can make these meaningful changes in the workplace. So the aim of our summit today is to really inspire you on these topics. My name is Emma White. I'm a psychologist at OpenUp, and I will be the host of today's session. But I'm not alone in the studio today, as I'm joined by Gijs Coppens, CEO of OpenUp. I'm joined by Simon Adair, who is operational leader and director of Health, Safety, Security and Resilience at the BBC. And I'm joined by Noor van Boven, who is a co-founder of Invested and a board member and investor. A very warm welcome to the three of you, and I must say I'm very excited for our conversation today and also addressing all the questions from our listeners during our session. So to kind of kick off our conversation, I'd like to start with more of a personal question. So what are one of your current challenges that you are facing in this age of hybrid working and changing employee values, especially from the perspective of you being a leader? And I'd like to start with you, Noor.
And thanks, Emma. And good first question to kick it off. It's always important to have a good start. I think one of the biggest things, and I'm very young, but when I started working, the biggest challenge for HR leaders was that managers needed to manage 3 different generations. And it were like 3 generations, and every generation has a very uniform way of expectations of work. And I think that has really changed a lot, right? So first it became a more international workforce, so that dimension came in. Now generations are following each other up way quicker. And our individual needs and how we've organized our lives is very different per person. So that also means that as a manager, you have a higher diversity in wishes and expectations from the employer and a preference on in which circumstances people can do their best work. And then on top of it, you have the layer of hybrid work. So they need to pick up the signals not only by physically seeing people, also with seeing it remotely and in a more virtual world, picking up those signals. And I know for myself, and I was a people leader, for example, at N26, that was one of the things where I really needed to pay really conscious effort and remind myself of that diversity of thinking and thought and ways of working in the team.
Incredibly complicated if you put it out like that in that way. And what are the things that have helped you in dealing with these challenges?
I think the main thing is making things explicit and make it a conversation, right? Like we should all operate in an organization that's diverse, coming from assuming good intent. That is one of the most important foundational topics. And then having an open conversation around this complexity, which then leads to, okay, I as a leader have the responsibility to seek the insights, but I also need you as a team member or an employee to bring me the insights, right? So I will facilitate the conversation, but you need to participate in the conversation so we can all create a setup where we can all do our best work and I can be the best leader for you.
So it's really leveraging that shared responsibility and being a team together and making it part of the conversation.
Yeah, and don't act on assumptions. So make it very explicit, like really have that conversation and like you cannot assume that everyone likes working the same way as you like to work.
Thank you, Noor. And Simon, what is one of the challenges that you are facing at the moment in this space?
Leadership is not easy. It really isn't. And I think what we have seen since COVID is the demands on leaders now are very different to what they were 4 or 5 years ago. I think leaders have to be different things than what they were. Of course, they need to be the strategist, they need to look after the finance and accounts, but there also needs to be the listener, the counsellor, the friend, the hirer, the firer. Those things haven't changed, but I think accessibility into leaders now is much more than what it was. We talked earlier about there was a standoff in between leaders and employees potentially before COVID. But since COVID happened, you see into leaders' lives a lot more. Be that virtually you're in the kitchen, the dog's barking, people are walking in the background. It's normal. The leaders are normalised now within those types of conversations. But what I'm certainly seeing is that employees want more from leaders. They want richer conversations. And you made a great point about the depth of those conversations as well. It's not enough just to sit and nod now. You need to be interactive. And I think deepening listening skills has become a real thing now for leaders now. We're looking at psychological safety for workplaces and to create that environment. There's a lot of bad things come from COVID, but in terms of the behaviours for how we treat employees and how employees want to be treated, I think is really relevant now. And you're right, the baby boom period is finished. We have Gen Zs, we'll have millennials who all want very different things and expect very different things from managers. So managers have got a tough job, leaders have a tough job now in order to adapt to those timings.
Yeah, just kind of linking it to what Noor said as well, it's becoming even more complicated and diverse what's expected of the leaders, and that is definitely a challenge. And Gijs, what about you? What are one of your challenges?
Yeah, I can fully echo the stories of Simon and Noor. I'm the CEO of a fast-growing company myself. OpenUp grows with a factor 3 every year. And I also need to adapt to, let's say, this new reality every time, and also to the hybrid way of working. So I would say my personal challenge is how do I manage my energy? Because I'm always on, I'm always switched on. We always have meetings. I live outside of Amsterdam. I drive here with the car. In the car, I have 2 or 3 calls. When I drive to the office, I'm in the office. I have meetings. Then I drive back. I have 2 or 3 meetings. So I'm always switched on with either offline meetings or online meetings. And that is also challenging, I would say, as a leader. So managing my energy in that world where we can be always in connection to each other is something I find challenging. And then I would say on the company level, of course, we are also learning how to do this properly with hybrid work and managing energy, managing meetings, being in the office, being at home. How do you combine that? What do you do in the office? What do you do when you work from home? So, I can fully relate to the topic. So very happy to have this conversation.
But it's actually a good reminder, if I can comment on it, because I think also a lot of people listening on the call are HR leaders. And I know as an HR leader, we have the tendency to think but the managers and leaders, they just need to be really in tune, indeed what you're saying, they need to be an attentive listener. But your reality is that you're running from meeting to meeting, online, offline, all the time. So we can demand you to be completely in the moment and tuned in and picking up all the signals. But in the reality of your day-to-day, that's also very difficult to do, right?
It's very difficult. It's like you need to be some sort of a superhuman in a way as a leader, with all these tasks and responsibilities. Indeed, and also be an active listener, not have your own agenda, really be open to the story. So I try to do my best, but I think as a leader, indeed, that's very taxing nowadays.
It's a difficult conversation sometimes to have conversations with your work employees and talk about personal boundaries when you don't do them yourself. We don't do them ourselves as leaders. We're the ones that's working 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, working weekends as well. It's not what we want for our people, but we expect it of ourselves. And if we're going to set that example for new leaders coming forward, then something has to shift in that, doesn't it?
And I find that so difficult because I know that I've been successful with one way of working. So I continue to do so. And by, let's say, creating more boundaries, kind of letting go sometimes, be less controlling in a way, I find that very tensionful because I'm so used to one way of working. But I fully echo that we should be the example as leaders to make sure that there is new freedom for employees to also change their behavior.
And if I could link this maybe to the next question, because Simon, how have you experienced leadership roles and styles adapting to hybrid work environments? And I could hear some echoing already in the conversation we were having before, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
So from a personal perspective, I wake up at the beginning of every week and say, these are the boundaries that I'm going to put in for myself. And I achieve them 1 out of 10. They feel straight away. When I go into my workplace, and I go there once or twice a week, I deliberately don't sit at my personal laptop doing emails. You know, I'm in the zone with the people I'm speaking with in that time. I think it's wrong for them to see you on a virtual aspect, and when you're in the office, you head down on calls as well. And it's funny because when I'm at home, I'm on back-to-back calls all day. When I'm in the office, it doesn't happen like that. I'm not on back-to-back calls. So there's something about my own cultural change, how I had to adapt in there. I think we were saying before, where I have a 3-minute rule that I've set for myself, where I'll give everyone a minimum of 3 minutes. If they need more, and I could be walking and talking, someone will hijack me walking to the water cooler, and right, make your pitch. You've got 3 minutes, and they're on point. They know how I want it. They know how my communication preference. If it needs longer, then it needs longer. But I think when you're in the office, in that space, you've got to give your people time. You've got to be present in that conversation. You've got to listen to learn, to understand, not to respond. So I think one of the things I've certainly learned is to, when I'm in that space, is to be available for those around me.
And how have you been noticing the impact of this?
Directly by feedback. And I think what I've seen people have learned is that I've got 3 minutes. I'm going to get in there quickly. And then when it needs a bigger conversation, I'll say book some time in for that. But I think what it has allowed me to do is allow me to spend more time coaching my leaders below me as well. That physical interaction piece, and seeing the value of having better conversations and how they have those conversations downwards. And I think by just generally checking in with people, I think I'm closer to the people I work with and know more about their personal lives now, which I think is a good thing, because I think as a leader, if you understand the challenges for the individual and you understand what they're going through, and if they're not performing at the best at that stage, then you can help them overcome that hurdle. So I think what I've certainly learned is that I understand my people much more than what I did before.
And I think if we're tapping into the whole topic of trust and psychological safety, that's so incredibly important to have those connections with the people around you.
Yeah, look, psychological safety, I think corporates go through buzzwords of every year, and psychological safety is the word now. But, you know, it's so important. We're looking at in the BBC, and I'm sure many organisations have different definitions of what that means. But actually, it sits at the heart of well-being and mental health, and just creating that environment for people to speak up and to open up as well. It's so important. But to get that culture within an organisation is a challenge. It's difficult, right? For managers to go, okay, this is not going to be a personal attack on me. I need to create this environment. But if the manager then sets those behaviours and say, look, this is okay to talk like this, then, you know, if we all did that, the working space would be much, much better.
And I think it's one thing that we say we want this to be a safe space, or we want psychological safety, but it's another thing to act on it and to really create that space. And I think it's really inspiring to hear how you're going about that.
It's not easy, and it takes time. And to use that word, okay, this is a safe space. Well, that's just a word itself. By managers, I think I saw a great example in one of the teams last week when I jumped on one and listened to their calls about how they're trying to operationalise psychological safety. And that manager was talking about what his concerns were, what affected him within that workplace. And straight away then, 2 or 3 people were talking about it. And then from that, they identified an issue that no one had considered before. And they were able to get on top of that and then figure out how they were going to work and to fix that. But it really can work, psychological safety, and it's an important thing for people to adopt.
Thank you, Simon, for sharing that. And I'd like to move on to the next topic. So how does the demand of leadership roles impact self-care? And what strategies can leaders implement to ensure their own well-being? Now, Gijs, you were already mentioning a little bit about managing your energy, so I'd like to give this one to you.
Yeah, I think if I look at well-being for managers, for leaders, then for me it's a lot about rhythm. It's a lot about repetitive behavior. You could say habits that you want to adopt as a leader. So for me, it's about, for instance, having my breakfast at home with my 2 young children. That's a moment for me that I really feel part of, let's say, the family. And then, you know, I'm switched off from work. My worrying doesn't start yet. And then I start the work day, and then, you know, everything comes to me. And also in this work week, I have these moments that are repetitive. So I have moments with my direct reports. I have one-on-ones. I take the time for that. So 1 hour. Still offline indeed. So I also believe that the quality of that offline contact is very important. And that's for me also a moment to gain energy in a way, because of that real connection that you can feel to the people around you in the company. So that's very important to me for my well-being. And what I learned in this journey is also to share more of my dilemmas with the people around me in the company. And that's also really helpful in kind of not having everything on your own shoulders or on your own chest, pressing on you in terms of responsibility, but really make it a shared responsibility in the group. I started doing that with the leadership team, but now we also do that in an organized way with all of the colleagues in the company. And I really enjoy that very much. I get energy out of it. So that's for my personal well-being as a leader, very important. Just to give some examples.
Yeah, so it's really the rhythm and the routine and the structure, being vulnerable and having that connection that also gives you energy as well.
Yeah, that's what I really value in work. And I would say at work I have the most meaningful conversations. To be very honest, I think I have more meaningful conversations at work sometimes than in my private life. So I really value that, in the workplace.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And Simon, what about you?
Setting boundaries and behaviours that I never used to adopt before. And whether it was a bit of hero mentalism, where I wanted to always be the person that picked up the phone, I always wanted to be the person that was first to the email. I learned through my time as being a leader that actually by doing that, I'm also stopping other people developing below me as well, by not giving them the opportunity. And when I remember being on skiing holidays and taking conference calls on ski lifts coming up, and it's crazy. We shouldn't. Organisations don't want that from their leaders, but we, out of some emotional reason ourselves, we do that. So I've stopped doing that. When I go on leave, I turn my phone off. I have an out of office and saying, this is the person I need to contact. Don't contact me because I won't be responding to this. I've only just started doing that, and the results I found was nothing changes. People don't bother me. People go to my delegated authority in this. And actually that gives them an opportunity to develop and grow within that space as well. I also carve time out within my day where I'm working as opposed to responding to calls. I think we've seen some statistics where you're effective for the first 2 hours of a call each day. Then after that, you're just in the moment. So I try and minimize the calls that I'm on, but have chunks in my diary where I just do not disturb, where I'm actually doing proper work and I can control my own time when I'm doing that as well. And that's what I've tried to encourage my other people to do as well. So it's really about setting those own personal boundaries. For me, that has been a challenge. But when you let go and let other people take the reins, it doesn't fail. It really doesn't, and it gives you that time you need to recharge your batteries.
Yeah, so boundaries a big role for you. And what about you, Noor?
Yeah, a bit in line, but I would add something to it, because clearly what both of you are saying is like you're building like your little architecture of how you want to work. But especially as a leader, you have a lot of others influencing that. So the architecture can't come only from your intrinsic needs. Like, for example, it's good to understand what your team needs from you in order to fly. Because if the team flies, I have less worries as a leader, right? So that could be that one direct report says, okay, I want to have an hour per week just to go operationally to topics, but I want to have one lunch per month or one walk every other 2 weeks to talk about me personally. But before, I don't want to make assumptions what they need, because then I'm creating an architecture, how it works for me, assuming that all of them wants this amount of time from me. So having that individual conversations, and then of course you have your peer group, you have your direct leaders, you might have a board or external people, but understanding what all of them need from you and building that in your architecture, and then designing it in a way that works best for you, that for me helps. And the second thing that I found helpful is, and I think all of you have that as well, that you have multiple different topics and stakeholder groups in your roles. And with the set meetings, I try to cluster it around certain topics. So if you can never have a day only around the topics. But if, for example, there's a lot around financials and budgeting and internationalization, I try to do all the number stuff, the fixed meetings, all on a Tuesday, because then I know my mindset is in that. I try to do my team meetings on the same day. So it saves mental space if you can tunnel it a little bit and that you don't need to change context every half an hour, which very often happens when you don't have any control anymore.
You raise a great point about communication. A number of years ago, I would just be firing off emails all time of the evening to people. And, even though you say, okay, you don't need to respond to this, people would respond. So your behaviours were having a detrimental impact onto them as well. Sure. Now I have a rule where I don't send emails after 5 o'clock, and they're all banked up and sent in the morning. And what I was doing by sending these emails sporadically throughout the weekend, I was demonstrating that I actually wasn't in control. I wasn't in control of myself or how I was communicating with the business, and I was expecting them to respond in the same way. So actually my behaviours were detrimental to the well-being of others, which I learned, and it wasn't until someone said that to me in that language and those words did it really resonate with me. But I totally agree with your point about the communication aspect of that.
Yeah.
So for you, Noor, it was really about taking a step back and understanding the needs of others so that you can create your own architecture, and also kind of clustering your days in a way that you don't have to constantly mentally shift between all the different roles and responsibilities that you have.
And what I really like also in the story of Noor, and Noor is also advising me sometimes to do that, is to really have that conversation with your team. And I sometimes forget it because you want to solve some problems. You think I need a structure, I need a way of working, and this is it. This is how I will do that. And then you have others following that. But that conversation, how do we want to work together? How are we going to be successful as a team? I sometimes forget that step. And I think it's a very important step to also add in your arsenal, in your, let's say, portfolio of interventions as a manager.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. And back in my space, we had the same issue in terms of what are the rules that we want to work with. Yeah. We wrote them down, we fit them into a format and said, look, these are the rules and behaviours that we as a department will adhere to. And it was around just the culture of email, it's about being present at meetings, it's around challenging, but whether we like it or not, we get on board with the decision. And we all agreed with these. And they were really powerful because I kept asking the leaders below me to keep bringing this back to their team members all the time. Remember what we agreed, to make that a culture within the space, because if you don't revisit it, it gets lost pretty quickly.
I like it very much. And do you sometimes evaluate the rules again and talk it over again?
We do, and the rules themselves were formed through one-to-one feedback sessions. Yeah. So after we did a staff survey, I then did an individual feedback session with every single member of staff in my department, which was like 60, 70 odd people, which was extremely time consuming. But the data I got from that allowed me then to create this new mechanism that we all agree to, which was fantastic. Now, whether that's relevant in 2 years' time, because changes may materialise, we don't know. We will revisit it again, but for 2 years, it's working pretty well.
Wow. Really inspiring to hear, and maybe linking into that, so the behaviors of the department. So what characteristics makes a leader successful given the changing values of employees today? And anybody who wants to take this question?
I'm happy to take it. I think what you were mentioning in the beginning as well, like being a listener and a connector. I think one of the things that, sorry for all the leaders listening, but like we don't know better. Other people might know better at times, right? So it's good, like, cater for conversation. I think the one thing that leaders need to become really, really good at, and it's a topic we haven't touched on yet, but is making things really explicit. Also what you expect from an employee, right? Especially in this hybrid world, everyone has different needs. Is as a leader being able to say, this is the output I expect from you, this is what good looks like, and this is what great looks like, and these are the boundaries in which you can act. And within that, you have full autonomy. Now tell me what you need to deliver this. And I think there are very little HR people who ask managers the question, but there are also very little managers who can answer the questions. If I really ask someone, even an HR leader on this call, think about it, a recruiter, you all know what they should do. But if I ask you, break it down in 5 deliverables and describe per deliverable what it looks like when they're doing it good and how they're doing it great. And if you put the effort in to think that through and you're able to give that to your employee, and then you can say, and this is the budget that you have, or this is your decisions right that you have, and within that you have freedom, what do you need from me as a leader? I think that is very important. And we need to train managers to be equipped to have the conversation, but also to be very explicit. And that also comes back, by the way, to psychological safety. We always think that it's about the psychological conversations to have. The safety is also in knowing what your boundaries are and what you need to deliver. And that is very often not done. You see, I can go on for this on topics. I will stop after this sentence. But we see a lot of leaders now saying, who were first we're going to be fully remote. And now it's all in the office. And the whole topic is that the leaders are overwhelmed and therefore they want to see you work. But we need to equip leaders to really think through what they expect to see in the output. And it will give them the peace to let you do your work how you should do it. And if you recognize this with your own manager, I encourage everyone, you can start that conversation.
Simon or Gijs, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah,
Simon, go ahead.
I think the depth of the conversation is really important, and I agree with everything that you've said there. Typically, we go into the conversation in order to pass on our expertise. What I've started to look at and encourage my managers and leaders to do below me is to have more listening conversations. It's okay about being direct at the very beginning. I think a lot of feedback we get from employees is that they're not clear exactly what their leader wants from them or how to achieve that. How to achieve it is what they can do. But typically we have a conversation where we are talking 80% of the time and the recipient, the employee, is on receive going, okay, well, where do I even start from that? I think every manager should be a coach. And in that dialogue with the individual, you should be allowing the employee to come up with the solutions themselves and then just asking the right questions, because A, you allow them to develop, and B, all they're doing is putting your thoughts onto something that they're going to deliver. Exactly what you said, we don't always get it right. You know, we have a lot on our plate at the moment in time, and when the bigger the plate is, the more food goes on there, and we're thinking, I just need to go into just delivery mode. In that 30-minute conversation, what's gone well, what hasn't gone well, what feedback have you had, this is my feedback from you, what do I need to start doing, what do I need to stop doing? That's a 30-minute conversation. And if you're speaking more than 10% of that time, you're getting it wrong. So it's the mechanism for the individual to have that conversation with you and you asking the right questions to provoke the response from them. That's going to empower them. Psychological safety creates that safe space. It creates an environment for them to develop and grow.
It sounds like really that shift from what used to be more of that command and control environment to really a care and connect through that coaching mentality, and in that way really helping them leverage their strengths.
And there is a time for that, right? And we're not, every sometimes conversations are going to be, right, I've got 10 minutes, you need to listen to what I'm going to say, and it gets across that way. And when you set that up at the beginning of that conversation, as opposed to just being some rant, right, I've got 10 minutes, I've got some really important things I need you to do, this is how I need you to do it, because time is of the essence. And when people see the balance between the two, it is different. But yeah, the command and control element, those leaders now, I think, are going to have challenges in societies where their leadership style is, people want more from that.
Yeah. So it's really linking to that adaptability, right, that we were talking about as well. So really adapting your style to also the situation and what's needed from you. Absolutely. I thought you wanted to say something.
Yeah, and there's a lot going on in my head as well. So this summer I was in the office for a company-wide event, and it was almost there were almost no colleagues in the office. And then I thought, oh, we really need to change the policy. You know, I want people to be in the office again. I want to see them. And of course, we also had conversations with HR, with Noor, and I realized, you know, it's also not a solution then to make very strict rules. So you need that conversation then about how do we want to work together, how are we going to use the office. So that was one thought I just had, and the other thought I had was about predictability. Yeah. So if you talk about psychological safety, then you talk about predictability. If things are predictable, then people feel safe. So knowing what is expected of me has to do with predictability, but also your behavior as a leader, you should be predictable to people. Yeah. And you don't want to switch from policy 1 to policy 2 over the weekend because you had one experience. But that's sometimes what happens if you just follow your reflexes as a leader. So that I think predictability for me is a very important value as a leader, because that creates that kind of safe environment. And also as a company, you want to be predictable. So could also be even a company value.
Yeah, so mirroring that there.
Yeah.
So really knowing what to expect of you as a leader.
Yeah.
And I heard you touch upon the topic of where to work, the hybrid work environment. And I'd like to give you a next question. So in terms of guidelines for hybrid working, so whether it be a 50-50 split or 100% remote or 100% at the office, how do formal communication formats and potential restrictions on perceived employee freedom impact overall productivity and well-being, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think from, let's say, my role as a psychologist, I was trained as a psychologist. Autonomy connectedness is a very important psychological construct. And autonomy connectedness means that you have the freedom to, develop the things you find important yourself. It has to do with self-awareness, for instance. That's about that autonomy part. That's also about the guardrails that we talked about expectations. And within those boundaries that we set, within those guardrails, there's a lot of freedom that has to do with autonomy. And with the connectedness, it's about how do we relate to each other? How's the relationship? What's the quality of the relationship? And I think that autonomy connectedness is very important. And that's something we are reinventing basically as a company. Because of all the changes with the hybrid work environment, we need to reinvent that construct of autonomy connectedness. That's how I look at it. And I do believe that some offline contact, the meaningful conversation, the connection is important also in developing that construct of autonomy connectedness. So I'm very much in favor of a balanced approach and not either fully remote or fully offline. I'm somewhere in the middle.
In the middle, okay.
Yeah.
What about you, Noor?
Yeah, I think I see a lot of different companies, and I think a little bit the balance that came out of the market is that ideally, both for employees and employers, is around the 50-50 split or 40-60, whatever. And what it comes from is asking, and again, it comes about this explicit conversation, is having that conversation with the team level. What does everyone individually need? If you have single parents that need to pick up their child, that's also part of that discussion. People who, that's by the way very often a misunderstanding, but introvert people very often needed to go to the office because everyone needs social interactions, and extrovert people organize it proactively outside of the office, but introvert people don't. That's why actually during COVID also introvert people struggled more. So it's good to have a conversation with the team. Who needs sometimes to be in the office? For what do you need to be in the office? Do we need creation time? What type of problems are we solving as a team? Does that need the power of the collective brain, or does that need quiet downtime? And that you then design your team week. Where are we when in the office? And then also employees commit to each other. And we spoke about it before, but say Simon is my boss and Simon tells me, Noor, you need to be in the office on Tuesday. I can tell you every Tuesday morning at my coffee, I think, Simon. But if I have a conversation with Gijs and Gijs tells me can we meet in the office standardly on Tuesdays? Because then I know that and I like seeing you, and then we can solve some problems, and we do brainstorm sessions standardly on Tuesday afternoon. Then every Tuesday morning at my coffee, I think oh, awesome, cool, it's my office day. So my commitment to come and my engagement is very different than when it comes top down. So I think I'd like the 50-50 as well. And it's interesting that when you see that teams have to design themselves, they always end up around the 50-50.
Oh, really? That's
so
really
that's
interesting.
really interesting, right?
So I almost wanted to say it sounds like it shouldn't be a one-size-fits-all, but it comes to the conclusion that when they do it themselves and you kind of space for all the individual needs, it does sound like it does move towards
but in
people
very
want
different
the same.
ways. So with some, it might be, hey, we do 1 week 2 days and the other week 3 days. But others do every other week full days, right? Or a month, everyone can do whatever they want. But we do 2 weeks because someone lives very far away and then organizes it. So the form or shape of what that is very different per team.
And that links to the autonomy that Gijs was then talking about. Yeah. And Noor, I'd like to follow up with the next topic for you. So how are companies ensuring the inclusivity and participation of all employees in decisions around hybrid work?
Yeah, I think it starts on team level and then comes up. So I think it's good to have that open conversation. But I also think it's important to talk very realistically about it, right? Because if you look at how companies solve... a company basically is all about solving problems. That's what we do, right? On a company level and on a team level. And some things are solved, also problems within the organization, through formal lines. That's why we have policies and rules and agreements. But also a lot is solved informally. And definitely people in hypergrowth, you would OpenUp will have that as well. Like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, so you figure it out with the coffee machine, or someone is talking about, I'm working on this project, and then someone says, but Joe is also working on that project. That's how you come together. If you work in a 100% remote company, and you can ask, the remote companies that are 100% remote are also publishing about that, everything is super tightly ruled. It's 100% process because everything is done formal. Because like the informal interactions are now formalized in how, so everything is 100% documented. And I think the public perception in general is like 100% remote means that everyone is surfing in Bali, and like when they got the wave, then they quickly go online. In reality, that's not how it works, right? And I think we need to have a realistic conversation around the advantages of not having to go to the office and the advantages to go to the office, and not as a friction between employer and employee, but just as human beings and needs. And start there.
And it also depends on the environment and what the business is doing as well. You know, from the BBC,
oh, for sure.
You have news, which is a constant beast that's pulsing all the time. We have live content, radio. So we have parts of the business that are always there. And I think we always look at this from the employee's perspective, but from the CEO of an MD of a company, he walks into an office one day and there's no one there. Naturally, he'll think, or she'll think, gosh, what's everybody doing? Because they don't always know. Yeah. I think that's sometimes where the pressure comes from top down, is because that's what they're experiencing when they're coming in. When the office is thriving, when it's busy, there's a feel-good factor. These are my people, I know what they're doing. When they're not there, thinking, well, what are they doing? You know, so you can see from both sides of the fence, can't you?
Yeah, and also, what that's really good that you're saying that, we are now talking as desk workers, right? So we're talking from, that's only a small part of the working space. Like most people work in a store or in construction or are deskless workers, where this is absolutely not a topic. So we think that it's the biggest topic everywhere, but like, let's not forget that the majority of people work in jobs where this is not a topic. So it's always good to remind ourselves of that as well. Right?
And I'm wondering, are there any specific methods or systems in place in your own company, for example, such as team scheduling or voting systems or adaptations to cater to these various preferences and commitments?
Yeah, the team voting thing raises a good question, because that could be good and bad. You know, there's times when we did the team voting thing at the very beginning, and used COVID as an example, when you had 15,000 employees on a call, and you're going, how are you feeling today? Just a quick benchmark test, how are you all feeling today? And 95% say terrible. Okay, so anyway, about the rest of the call then, and you go, how do you move on from that? Because you need to address that problem then. So by asking the question, you need to be prepared to answer the question. So now I deliberately stay away from those calls and those type of methods, and have the one-to-one type of conversation as well. But I think the ability to have quick calls, get everyone a call, 5 minutes, and then off again, I think is really powerful. In a working environment, sometimes that's difficult because people are on different floors, or they're in a meeting physically. You can IM someone and say, really important, 5 minutes of your time. It's not a 30-minute conversation. This is what I need to do. Any questions? Right, great, we're off. Let's have a catch-in again later on. I think what it does, it builds productivity using that type of method. And I think what we always do as well within our team is that if we have an hour session, we only have 45 minutes on an hour. We give people the 15 minutes at the very end to go to the bathroom, have some water, have a cup of tea, do what they need to do before the next meeting, because we don't want to have back-to-back. I've got a call, another meeting to go to, then we're off onto that one. You're not engaged on that, but setting those boundaries is important for us.
Gijs or Noor, anything to add?
I can add that we are still learning as an organization as well how to do this. I think what we have done is have a lot of meetings. So we have like a strategy afternoon. We have a croissant and jus update in the morning on how the company is doing. We have revenue calls about the commercial progress. We have product calls. And all the employees are always invited to all these calls. And then the feedback that we get is there are too many calls. So we are also searching what is the ideal rhythm there. I can fully also echo the fact that you don't want these back-to-back meetings in a day. We still do that. So I think here there's still work in progress. And I think the most important thing is that we kind of rethink how we organize our meetings. Because we tend to do a lot of meetings. And that's also what we see in statistics since COVID. I think the number of meetings has doubled in the average knowledge worker agenda. So that's what we also look at.
Agree.
Yeah, I would advise to do it a bit workshop style with a team to set a way of working and then revise it every quarter. And I agree with surveys, it's always very tricky because we forget to ask how important it is. So I have no opinion about the table. But if you now ask me, what do you think about this table? Now all of a sudden I have an opinion. But I don't even care about it, right? And I think we sometimes do it in the office. That probably everyone appreciates your orange juice at your sessions in the morning. Appeal to me. But if you're now going to ask everyone's opinion to rate the orange juice, all of a sudden the quality of the orange juice becomes a topic. Well, it was never a topic with anyone, right? So it's
and if you ask the question, you've got to be prepared for the answer, haven't you?
And could you provide an example of successful adaptations of leadership styles in the current era of hybrid work and changing employee values? Anybody who wants to take this question?
Yeah, I'll start with this one. So I think, as we discussed earlier, the requirements of a leader has changed significantly over the last couple of years. And I think we talk about things differently with employees. We talk about psychosocial risk assessments in workplace now, which is not something that we did 4 or 5 years ago. You know, and when we introduce these type of things, is about engaging with employees first off. If we're going to see monumental change in an organisation, everyone's going through change in some capacity. Are we asking those right questions at the very beginning to make sure that we are preventative about any solutions going forward? And we're very good in the BBC at reacting to solutions because we do that all of the time, but put less emphasis on the preventative side. If you flip that, then the input, the reactive element will be much, much less. The impact on people will be different. So I think from the leadership aspect in that space is starting off with the right mindset in terms of what you want to do, laying your stall out in terms of how you want to deliver it, and addressing those problems very, very early on before they become an issue. And then talk to people, this is what we're doing. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying we're going to do psychosocial risk assessments and this is why we're going to do them and this is the input of them. They need to be involved and educated in what you're doing. Don't just hide that as a secret so that it's being done to them as opposed to with them.
What I really like in our organization, we have written a code of ethics on how we want to behave together in the company. And we have also made some very explicit skills that are connected to how we want to behave in the company. And we're now training the leadership on these skills. It's basically a bit of psychological training, I would say. So it's about how do you give feedback? How do you give proper feedback? How do you receive feedback? How do you actively listen to each other? So all these very, I would say, basic psychological skills are very important for the leadership, but also, of course, for all the colleagues in the company. But to really train them, make that actionable, that's what I really enjoy in building up our company. That we thereby kind of increase the level of awareness on how to do this properly.
Yeah.
I think it's great what you're doing here in OpenUp. I still believe that organisations need to do more to help managers and leaders have those conversations.
Yeah.
You know, I think typically people get promoted into a job because they're good at a job. Yeah. You know, I'm a technical person. You're great at writing data scripts. You're going to get promoted. But when it comes to having a difficult conversation with someone, or someone giving them feedback, or setting those boundaries out there, that's a skill. Yeah. And I don't think organisations go far enough to support and teach managers how to have those conversations.
I think that's something that I've also observed during my own not very long career yet, but that often it's, managers, they get promoted because they're good at their job, and then they're suddenly a manager, and then they're expected to do something completely different that wasn't necessarily related to what they were doing before. And suddenly they're expected to be a good listener, to be a coach, to be able to adapt to all these different ways and their employees and their colleagues. So really what I'm hearing you say is really taking them into that training and helping them and preparing them for their role as a manager.
Well, we found the BBC when we recently did a wellbeing survey, and we found out that through the data that we've collected on this, that employees didn't go to managers, not because they weren't equipped, it's because they were equally under as much pressure as what they were as well. And we're now rolling out a new peer support network in the organisation, and it's great that the majority of the applicants in that process are managers. So there's a real desire for people to do the best. I don't believe any manager wants to do a rubbish job. They want to come and do the best job they can, but equally they want to have the tools and be trained how to do that best job.
Yeah.
And I think that the HR team also has a role in that, right? Because HR understands, like, if we're changing our reward philosophy, that we need to train managers to have those reward conversations with employees. But very often nowadays, companies are initiated by HR, are making mental health a conversational topic in the organization. They support with benefits so employees get access to it. But very late in the journey, we start training managers to have the conversation. But now we encourage and activate the employees to start this topic. And then it becomes uncomfortable for manager and employee if the manager doesn't know what to do with the outcome of that in the conversation. So we also need to approach it holistically as HR leaders, I think.
We talked earlier about the psychological safety workplace, the importance of that, and an example of real life issues that managers are having to face that they didn't have to face 20, 30 years ago. You have a 50-year-old manager, and you have a one of their employees that comes and saying, "My mental health has been impacted because of my menopause," and the manager's going, I don't know how to even have that conversation, but as an organisation, there's so much we can do in terms of tools and conversations and signposting. We're not expecting the manager to be all of a sudden become a counsellor. That's the last thing that we want. But actually what we want to do is to know where to signpost people, is to listen to the concerns, is to recognise those concerns first off and actually say, okay, I understand this, how can I help you? That's a really important place that we need to get to with managers, I think, now.
Yeah, that's a good shout out to OpenUp. Is that I think it's so good that OpenUp is also giving support material to managers to help them being equipped to have those conversations.
Great, well done.
Definitely. Meaningful conversations, very important. I have quite some questions coming in through the chat, so from the listeners, and I'd also like to give some space for those. Cool. So Max on LinkedIn asks, what advice would you give to employees that maybe have line managers that aren't the best leaders and or managers who might not appreciate constructive criticism? Anybody want to take that question?
I'll have a go because we tackled this one. 360 feedback is really powerful, and I think that if leaders want to be the most effective leader, they need to change. Okay, so I think you can't expect to repeat your same behaviours and expect everything to change around you. It's a definition of madness, isn't it? And I think it starts with the leader first off. I think by having an open, honest conversation, by creating that safe space, if an individual doesn't feel that they can have it because it will have conflict, then there should be other managers, other peers within that manager they can have that conversation with. I think it's always, you can always go above the individual to come down. I think that can be sometimes quite dangerous because it could affect the relationship. But I think by finding a common person that both parties know can often do that. But for the manager creating that 360 feedback, it's written on there, they can see it, they can adapt themselves. I think it's really powerful, but it's got to start with the manager. If they're not willing to listen, to learn, then it is an uphill battle. That's what HR is there for, right? In terms of having these supportive conversations.
Give it to us.
Give it back. Throw it off the fence to HR.
It's always HR.
Yeah, it's always HR. But, it's typically sometimes, if we don't have a solution for individuals, then what we're saying is, just suck it up. It is what it is. There's corporate mechanisms in place that are there to support employees to have better conversations with managers in that way. So my first advice would be is engage with your HR BP, have the conversation with them, try and create a scenario where you are introducing psychological safety in the workplace, but also create a scenario where it's feasible to give 360 feedback.
I fully agree. There's one pragmatic thing I would add to it, maybe on the short term, is if it's a very transactional leader focused on results, to say, I want to do my best work and deliver on it, but this is what I now need from you. Because then you link it to the output, and it sounds like this manager might be very output driven to say, this is what I need from you in order to deliver upon. Can you deliver that on me? Sorry,
I like that very much, Noor. And what I always remembered when in dating, when you search for your partner, that also understanding kind of the manual of the partner is very important. So we have Alain de Botton, he's a philosopher, and he always says, you need to understand kind of the psychological problems of your partner in the beginning, because then you know what you're up to in the relationship. And I think that's a bit is the same with the manager, that you want to understand the manual of that manager. That's very important. So what I would like to make explicit with the people in my team is, what is my manual? What is their manual? What do we need to know from each other to make this happen, to make this work?
I had a coaching session with someone from an external organisation the other month, and they had the same issue where they were struggling to get leverage with the manager. So what I asked them to do was to go to the manager and say, look, I know you're really busy. What can I take off your plate to help you deliver some of this stuff? And that then led to a conversation where actually the manager thought, okay, right, I've had this problem. I haven't been able to unpick it. So they're coming to the manager, taking stuff away from them, not adding to their problems. And that worked in that particular scenario.
A great example. So Daria has a follow-up question on the previous question. So what would your advice be to employees if they're leaders who decided you have to come X number of days to the office without bringing particular reasons for it, when everyone in the office prefers less days in the office and more at home for example, family time, long commutes, etc.?
Got a Chief People Officer question, this one.
Oh, this is a very easy one, Simon. I'll show you. I would start, it comes back to what I mentioned before, is when a leader asks that, they probably don't know themselves how to measure your impact. So I would avoid the whole discussion of like, I want to be in the office. No, I don't want to. That will never end well, right? Start with having a conversation like, hey, can we discuss my deliverables and what good and great looks like? Because I'm excited, I want to grow, I want a promotion. You can even make a draft yourself. I think these are my 5 deliverables. This is what I think good and great looks like. So really write up the 2 versions of it as a starting conversation. Because then you start to connect on output, and that will release it. Your manager is not coming from... is not coming from bad intent. They're just trying to make it work, right? Another thing would be to say, hey, we all have different needs in the team. I know you would like us to be here, but it doesn't work with desk or it doesn't work with our meetings, etc. Can we do a session with the team on how we can best workshop with the team, how we can best work together, and have it very driven to how can we deliver our deliverables. Always link it back to what is the outcome of the output of the team and the problems we need to solve.
Really nice example. Anything any of you would want to add to that?
Look, it was a great question as well, because it is really difficult. I think another element of that is to say, when I come into the office, how can we best use the time that I'm in there?
Yeah.
So what is the key thing that we're going to come in together? How can we be creative as a team, and we use the time in the office to do something more than just sat down with emails? Ask that open question to your manager. Let him fill the gaps in. I think sometimes with companies, conversations more of a case of why it won't work for me. This is what I've got. This, I do that. I can't come in because of these reasons. But if you flip that to say, if we do come in, how can we best utilize that time collectively together? That's a way of helping the manager be more creative about the time that he's using with his people as well.
Yeah. So I have a next question from Menno. And Menno asks, how would you ensure important company informations and decisions reach all employees, especially those working fully remote, without bombarding them with email updates with nobody reads?
Don't use Slack. Sorry, that's very unpopular comment. But I've seen a lot of companies, so like we work remote, so all communications goes to Slack. Nah, Slack is like, I don't know how you manage all your WhatsApp. I'm very bad at it. But I think that Slack has the same dynamic. It's all instant messaging, but more and more, especially young tech companies, are using it as an all-staff channel. But the channels are so full that you cannot catch up. So the information gets lost. So it doesn't really matter how you communicate, but you need to be very consistent and deliberate about the different forms of information. Is it information that people need to find later? Is it information that new groups need to re-access? Like really build a plan with your different channels to use them for different information sources. And Slack is a great tool, but not a solution for everything.
Instantly making me reevaluate how I'm using Slack at the moment.
Me too.
I know, but most companies do.
No, but I think very good answer. Thank you for that. So Gary asks, how would you help a new middle manager deal with difficult employees? What would you do if their relationship goes sour? Who wants to take this question?
I'll go.
Yeah.
It's really difficult. I said at the very beginning, the first thing I said was leadership is not easy. And as a new manager coming in, you would benefit from coaching, whether your organisation is willing to help you coach. You should be going up to your manager above you, which hopefully is coaching that individual as well. It's not enough just to think, oh, I'm going to have this conversation. You need to be trained. You need to have an awareness. You need to have a skill set in which to do that. There's loads of stuff online in order to get resources. There will be information within the corporate that allows people to have these conversations as well. You will hopefully have access into your occupational psychologist, who will be the great point of contact to have this. But I would always go and ask to be coached from your leader above to say, look, hey, I'm going to have this conversation. I have this difficult employee. How would you handle it? I don't think as a leader, when I've had people come to me from that, I've never said, oh, there must be a rubbish manager that can't deal with this. Actually, what it does demonstrate is that individual respects you enough to ask for your opinion. So it's a bit of a two-way street. But we have these difficult conversations all the time. And typically, the amount of stress that's put on managers to have these conversations is overwhelming sometimes. Levels of our own anxiety. Are we going to get it right? Are people capturing what I'm saying so they can use it against me in some way? It can be really difficult for people. So I'd have a script, be clear about what you say, don't get emotional, listen to the facts, don't feel like you need to respond there and then it's okay to come back and say, can I get back to you on that? So don't feel like you need to drive the conversation with results. It's okay to go back and to pick up where you left off if you don't know the facts at that time.
So the listening's really coming back really there as well, really listening to understand. So we have time for one more question. And this is from Tamara. So Tamara asks, and this is a question for Noor and or Gijs. Great insights from Simon already, she says. What do you prefer to do in the office and what do you prefer to do from home?
In the office, for me, it's very clear. It's meeting with people. So the best thing for me is that I do some emails at home, drive to the office, and then have my catch-ups. I also go for walks with people. I like walking. I like to talk over a walk. I think it creates a little bit more space, in a way, for new thoughts. So that's what I really like in the office, be with people.
Yeah, for me, my best friend is the whiteboard. I love like brainstorming about complex problems, or if you're co-designing a new program or something like that with other people. I think live beats online. But I would say that those sessions I would only do live if everyone is live. Yeah. Because if you're with some people live and some people online, for the people online it's just a subpar conversation. And same with one-on-ones. Like I like walking one-on-ones, because then also like the sour manager one. If you have difficult conversations, always go on a walking one-on-one, because you don't have to look each other straight in the eye. I don't know if the psychologists agree with that. Maybe
agree.
They say like you need to make contact.
I agree.
But, it's also more comfortable if you're walking and it's a little bit longer silent. That is completely fine, except when there's a table in between, then it gets very, very awkward. So those are the things I like live. Actually, funny enough, I do hiring someone, I would like to see them once. But in general, doing interviews from home, I really like because it's very concentrated. It's in my space. Like I'm really focused on that interview and not on what's happening around.
The power that you have of going out, or the access that the individual within your company has to you to go for a walk should never be underestimated. That's huge. You know, if you say walk around this beautiful city for 15 minutes and having that conversation with them, that's massive in terms of cultural benefit for having access to the senior leadership. It's really good.
Thanks.
Thank you, Gijs, Noor, and Simon for your insights and also your personal experiences on this topic. I've very much enjoyed our conversation and I've learned a lot, and I hope our listeners did too. They have more questions, but given the time, we unfortunately do need to round off. But yeah, thank you very much, and we really look forward to hopefully seeing you in tomorrow's session for the HR Summit. And if you're interested in reaching out to OpenUp, we're always very happy to talk about mental well-being, so you can find us on openup.com. That was it for now. Thank you, everybody. Thank you at home, and see you around.